Okay, this video is part 2 of how to develop self-control for men. And there's a part 1. You might want to watch that if you haven't seen that before, which is the big intro. But I'm going to go over a little more stuff here that's all going to be new. There's a 3-part brain concept of MacLean. It's sometimes called the triune brain, 3-part brain. The bottom line is your brain stem connected to your spinal cord. That's your reptile brain. And a reptile is primitive. It only needs to stay alive. All it wants to do is eat and reproduce. When it lays an egg, it just walks away from the egg. The baby doesn't have to do anything. So it's a very primitive, instinctual brain, the reptile brain. And then built on top of that is the mammal brain. The mammal brain is especially the cingulate gyrus, which goes right above the corpus callosum, and it's in continuity with the medial temporal lobe. So it's shaped like the letter C, like a Chicago Bears football helmet. This is the cingulate gyrus, or something called the isthmus that connects it then into the medial temporal lobe coming down here. Your brain looks like a fist. I don't know if I can get it in front of the camera. Your thumb is the temporal lobe, frontal lobe in front of this crease. Here's the parietal lobe, and then here's the occipital lobe back here. Anyways, up on top is where the cerebral cortex is. That is the human brain, the more sophisticated brain, the brain that's capable of delayed gratification. The mammal brain is the cingulate gyrus, what I was just talking about here. It's also called the limbic brain. And that is also very instinctual. A mammal is more sophisticated than a reptile. It has live-born young, it nurses the young, it cares about its young, it wants to take care of them, but it's still very instinctual. For a human, mammal brain is when you're in fight or flight. Do I run, do I fight, do I freeze, what do I do, what do I do? Okay, it's not for sophisticated, contemplative thinking, delayed gratification. The more you go towards the frontal lobes, the more anterior you are, the more you do the thing that you don't really want to do. Well, gee, I really should practice piano today. If I'm ever going to be good, I got to practice every day. I got to study today. You do that thing that will help you achieve your long-term goals. So anyways, what I'm talking about here is when you're sleep deprived, when you're drinking caffeine, when you're stressed out, you tend to be in mammal brain, and you're much more quick to react, and you're impulsive. And you got to be careful with that, because you'll often say or do things that you'll regret. When you're with friends and family, your girlfriend or something, you'll say something that you really shouldn't have said, and you'll upset the other person. So what you want to do is try to reflect in these moments. Like, tell yourself, I'm going to count to, 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever before I reply. I want to have that brief interval of thought before I immediately react, because sometimes, you're pissed off, you're mad at your girlfriend, you feel like, something's going on and she's annoying you, and you want to say something rude or nasty or insulting. And it's usually best not to do that. Sometimes it's funny, but you got to be careful. Usually best not to do that. And it's definitely usually best not to do that when you're in a work-related situation. You're being treated unfairly at work or something like that. It's usually best to think carefully before you speak. And we're going to talk more about that in the next thing. So the reason this diagram is useful is because you know yourself when you're stressed out, when you're sleep deprived, when you just drank caffeine. So you should be extra careful. Say, well, gee, I'm kind of hyped up right now. I better be careful not to spout my mouth off and say something that I'll regret. Because I've done it lots of times myself, and I've gotten better at controlling it now that I'm older. Also, just eating a low-fat vegan diet with no oil, that calms you down quite a bit. Notice how all these paleo keto carnivores are so badly behaved on the internet. Part of that's because of their diet makes them kind of impulsive and behave stupidly and aggressively. Okay, here's a couple quotes that can help you. First of all, stay away from places where trouble happens. You don't want to be going to bars. Nothing good ever happens in a bar. There's a lot of men who are drinking, and then, they're not able to attract a woman that night, so they're pissed off and they're drunk. Okay, and those guys are going around looking for a fight. So you could randomly end up getting into a fight just because you're in the wrong place. Stay away from those places. Stay away from bad neighborhoods. Stay away from people who drink alcohol too much, who smoke marijuana and use other drugs. Stay away from sleazy women. Okay, all of these things will get you into situations that you don't want to get into. So the best way to avoid, because I know a lot of young guys and they tell me, I got to learn how to fight, so I'm going to go to all this fight training school, whatever it is, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or whatever. I'm saying the best way to avoid getting in fights is avoid places where fights happen, okay? Don't go to rock and roll concerts. Don't go to bars. Stay away from all those things, okay? Pascal and other people said the thing that gets a man in trouble is that he's unable to stay in a room, okay? The other thing, too, is I would call it, I don't know, I had a performer mentality is what I'm trying to say. Is I always was thinking about my next performance and whatever it was, a wrestling competition or taking a test or writing a book or whatever it would be. So what I'm trying to say is I'm always thinking about achieving my goal. I'm not thinking about looking for mischief. Okay, if you're looking for mischief, you're going to find it. So don't be looking for mischief. Okay, you can go to one rock and roll concert and go deaf for a minute. It's so loud and you're stuck there. You can get trampled in the crowds. I don't like crowded places myself. Okay, here's a good quote from Marcus Aurelius. A man should be like a cliff. All day long, the waves will beat against its ankles, but the cliff is not moved. And I saw an example of that when I was a young student. I shadowed with some emergency room doctors, and there was this one really good emergency room doctor, and he was very calm, cool, and collected. The patient would be a train wreck, have all these problems, and it was real sad. He would just deal with it, do whatever he had to do, go to the next room, another train wreck, and he'd deal with it. And I was impressed by him. I was a young, impulsive guy at this time. And I'm like, how do you do that? How do you not get emotional with all these complex problems? He goes, I can't get emotional. In order to deal objectively with each patient, I have to stay unemotional. I try to be thoughtful, but I'm not emotional. There's a difference. He says, if I was, I wouldn't be able to have my act together when I went and saw the next patient and the one after that and the one after that. So that was great advice. I tried to be more like him. He was a good role model for me. Time is the greatest remedy for anger. Yeah, that's another good thing too. Like when you're pissed off, instead of saying something mean, most of the time saying something mean is not a good idea. Or writing a mean email is almost always a bad idea. So let some time go by. Ask yourself, does it really matter? Do I have to reply right now? Think for a day, 2 days, a week, maybe longer if you got the time, and you'll often come to a better, more objective thing. Run it by your friends. You want to get back with this girl, or maybe at work you're getting screwed over, or a friend betrayed you, let you down, whatever it is. Talk to your friends, your family, whoever, and feel them out. What seems to be the right way to handle it? A lot of times when you're pissed off, your judgment is off. So you want to avoid doing impulsive things that could burn bridges for you. Because a lot of times you want to keep bridges to people. As a matter of fact, I wish, I went far away from my hometown to school way out to Stanford, and I lost contact with all my high school friends, which was stupid. There was no cell phones in those days. There was no email back in those days. What I'm saying is I've seen a lot of people who stayed local from high school through college and then the rest of their life, and they've got a giant, Rolodex of phone numbers. So when they have a problem with their car, their friend's a mechanic. When they have a problem with their house, they got a friend who's a plumber, a friend who does air conditioning and furnaces and windows and whatever else it is. And that's nice. You'd rather deal with friends than deal with strangers. They're less likely to rip you off or cause other problems for you. So that's valuable. You want to be making friends, I screwed up on a lot of these things. I was just off. All I did in college was pretty much study and wrestle. And, I missed out on a lot of things because of that. But what I'm saying is you want to build up that network of friends because you all can help each other. And every person's got different types of skills, Like I remember when I was in college, there was this one guy who was an economics major, and he would arrange all the parties for this other fraternity. When I was a young guy, I kind of thought he was a goof off, always wanting to drink and go to parties and all this stuff. But later on, when I was a senior in college, I realized, wow, that guy's got tons of friends and knows tons of people. He's a good social networker, entrepreneur guy, and gosh, it'd be good to know somebody like that. You ever want to have a party, have that guy in charge of arranging it. I was kind of like socially isolated all the time, and my brother would make fun of me with Rain Man jokes, that sort of thing. Okay, other quotes here. Okay, when angry, count to 10 before you speak. If very angry, count to 100. Thomas Jefferson. And by the way, Thomas Jefferson, if you really study him, not the superficial crap like in a public school textbook or something, you read about him. He was an impressive guy. The real story on Thomas Jefferson is much more impressive than all the nonsense you hear about him. Okay, Voltaire, it is dangerous to be right when the established are wrong. That's another thing too. In your family, you tell the truth. But when you're in a work environment, many of these big corporations, what they really are is monopolies. They have no interest in truth. They just have power players. And there's no point in arguing from truth when you have nothing to gain. Usually the best thing to do when you're getting screwed over in a situation like that is to keep your mouth shut, retreat, go talk to your friends, go talk to lawyers, and find out what's your best option. Because you're not going to win with truth against a monopoly. Because they don't care about the truth, and they've got the power. So it doesn't do you any good. Yeah, you're right. So what? There's an old saying, I forget it, I think it was Orson Card, the science fiction writer. He said, the mouse knows he's right, but the cat eats him anyway. And that's kind of what you are. You're the mouse, and the big corporation is the cat. So don't piss it off for no reason because it's got a lot more power than you. And even if you're right, it doesn't really matter. I just tell you that so you understand the game. Most of the time in life, you are the mouse, not the cat. So you have to learn what's the smart thing for the mouse to do. And usually it is to shut your mouth. And here's Thomas Jefferson, another quote. Of all the systems of morality, ancient or modern, which have come under my observation, none appear to me so pure as that of Jesus. He was way more religious than is widely acknowledged. I read a couple of books about him. Okay, here's a quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian guy. He said, "Prize above all else those who love you and wish you well. Do not hurt or scold them. Never part from them in anger. It might be the last time that you see them, and you don't want them to remember you in a negative moment." Okay, so he was talking about Soviet Russia and what a disaster that was. But there's also a good point there, because sometimes people are very mean to the people who they love the most, their friends and family. So be careful about that. Learn to just kind of be harder on yourself than other people. Like when you're a little pissed off at a friends or family or something, ask yourself, what might have happened? Why didn't they show up on time? Why didn't they call me? Why didn't they text me back? Why did they let me down? And a lot of times, just think through your mind reasons why it could have happened and give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, if they're always doing it, yeah, they're an asshole and don't trust them anymore. But give them the benefit of the doubt, because a lot of times I've been all hyped up and angry or upset about something, then I realized, then later on I talked to them and they had a good reason. I just didn't anticipate it or foresee that might have happened. So you'll learn to be a little more forgiving and thoughtful and patient as you get older, and you should be. Okay. The other thing I did is I've gone through some times where I had some people hassling me, powerful people hassling me. And it wasn't because I did anything bad, it was because I was doing good things, okay? But I've had some powerful people hassling me. And things that I found helpful. I luckily had kept friends with a bunch of lawyers, so I get free legal advice whenever I want. That's a good thing. Plus, I found it fun to read a legal book, so I started reading all these lawyer books. And I actually ended up writing a lot of my legal letters myself. And that actually worked well. And I had fun doing it. But I'm just telling you, Gary Spence is a good guy to read. Gary Spence, here's a couple quotes by Gary Spence. He's a real famous lawyer. He said, "The function of the law is not to provide justice or to preserve freedom. The function of the law is to keep those in power who are currently in power." Yep, that's the truth. It's not made for you, the little guy. Unfortunately, it's made for the controllers. Okay, the function of a bureaucracy is to intercept every living idea and to smother it. Benefit, okay, so that's an important point too. If you join a corporation or something that's a big monopoly, you're probably going to find they don't really give a rat's tail about doing the right thing or helping the customer. They just want money and power for themselves. So if your idea isn't going to bring them more money or power, they probably don't want to hear it. And they probably don't want to hear it anyways, even if it will, because they don't consider it significant. So in that setting, don't waste your time. I say these things because, like, when I was a young guy, I'd ask my father's advice, and he'd say, just go to the meeting and tell the truth. And then I would talk to my mom later on. I learned to talk to my mom. It's more effective. My mom would say things like, oh, those men are a bunch of assholes. They're not going to want to hear anything you have to say. Don't even go to the meeting or don't say anything. And she'd be right. Because when I was a younger guy, I would alienate people and piss them off because I would just want the truth, want the thing that was the best. And I later learned it depends on the circumstances. If you don't have the timing, the clout to get anything accomplished in a meeting, there's no point in saying anything. Okay, let's see what next. Gary Spence continues. Benefit of telling the truth is it gives increased credibility. The truth is carried more by the sound than by the words themselves, for the sounds reflect the body language and the soul of the person. To be credible, you must tell the truth because it has the power of spontaneity, which is the key that unlocks the door of the listener because it's honest. Abstract words don't heat the blood. The best arguments dazzle with metaphor. So anyways, if you're finding yourself in a situation where you have to handle legal things like this, that there's going to be some discussion or debate or letters going back and forth, read all these lawyer books on how to write because I learned a lot of little tricks on how they do it. It's not a place I want to spend a lot of time, but it was a valuable experience to have gotten exposure to them. Okay, Machiavelli. It is prudent for men to abstain from threats and insults towards anyone, for this does not weaken them, but it only makes them more angry at you. Yeah, that's sort of what a weak person do. A weak person says, you guys are a bunch of assholes, jerks, all this. You don't gain anything by insulting people. All you do is piss them off, you burn the bridge, and you don't gain anything. And you just make things worse. So usually, even though you've been mistreated, treated unfairly, usually the best thing to do is shut your mouth. And if there's any way for you to get the situation to be more fair, then try to do it. But insulting people is very seldom the right way to do it. So you have to use your judgment. Sometimes writing a funny letter can be useful, but you have to know the context of it. You have to know who's going to read it, how will it be looked at, how will it be judged. Sometimes if I find myself in a difficult spot, I ask myself this question: how will my letter be judged? How will my note be judged? How will this email be judged if it's read by people who hate my guts? And the reason I say that is there's times when you have to deal with complex situations. And if you can think, how will my opponent feel? How will the outside judges feel? How would my friends see this? How will all the other people see this? How will coworkers see this? How will other students in our school see this? You can then see it from all the different perspectives. You'll be better able to figure out what's right. And that's often the benefit of talking to somebody else is they can give you a perspective where they're not emotionally involved, and therefore it's more objective than yours. Okay, Machiavelli. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. Therefore, one must be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten the wolves. So being a fox means thinking. Don't just bust in there all in a fuss and angry saying, I got treated unfair, this is not fair, and make a big fuss. That's not necessarily going to get you what you want. Often it's good to talk to a whole bunch of other colleagues. Like if you have a bunch of co-workers or friends and everybody's getting screwed over at the job, then you all simultaneously can speak up, and then you might be heard because it'll be seen as a lot of people are undergoing the same thing. You got a better chance that way. Plus you know what everyone else is going to say if it ever gets debated in an open meeting or something. Okay, then the lion to frighten wolves. Well, I'd say it's good to be able to write effectively. It's also good to have some friends in high places, because what you want to do is to never have to be in an argument or a fight or any of this other stuff. But at the same time, if somebody is your opponent, your enemy or something, you want them to know, if you mess with me, you will pay a price. I can write very well. I'll kick the crap out of you in a letter writing contest. I will kick the crap out of you. If there's ever an outside audience that views both of us, they will see that I behaved right. I did what was right for the customer or for the company or whatever it might be. And so they know that you're not worth the trouble. Basically, if they leave you alone, then they don't get hassled. But if they mess with you, they know there's going to be letters written, there's going to be a fuss, it's going to go to higher management. And so then they say to themselves, hey, this guy, he doesn't want trouble. If I leave him alone, he'll never give me any trouble, which you won't. And if I mess with him, he will fight back. He won't just surrender and roll over, So what I'm trying to say is, if you are highly articulate and you can write well, then you have the ability to fight back. Because I've seen a lot of people get screwed over in work-related contexts, for example. And they're so inarticulate and illiterate, they can't speak up in their defense. They can't write a letter in their defense. They just get screwed. And I've seen other people who are highly articulate. And when they get treated unfairly, they write all these letters, make all this fuss, and they can defend themselves very well. So it's good to have that, okay? You'd rather avoid having to be in any of these situations. Of course you want to avoid being in any of these situations. But sometimes people will pick on you. And you have to figure out, what am I going to do? And again, if it's a minor thing, a lot of times it's best to let it go. But if it's a big thing, sometimes you have to speak up. So it's good to have that ability. Here's a Machiavelli quote. Power is the pivot on which everything hinges. He who has the power is always right. The weaker person is always wrong. And I think that's true to a large extent in corporate environments, okay? What I've seen of corporations is that no one cares about the truth. They care about the power. And if somebody's got a lot of power, they'll do a lot of things quite often that are not fair and they're not nice. So, if you find yourself walking into that, don't walk into that blind, because you'll get crushed. If you have some ability to gain some power, if you will, by having a bunch of other people that were treated unfairly like you were, then you might be taken seriously. Then you might have a chance. You have to figure out the locals, the players in the situation, the politics of it, who's got the power in the situation. But what I'm trying to say is all of this is done with thoughtfulness. What a lot of young, stupid people do is they just make a big fuss, make a bunch of insults. Then they get labeled a hot-headed troublemaker, and they get screwed over at work, missed for promotion or fired or something else, and they get locked into this will never be promoted pathway. Then they pretty much probably should leave because they don't have any chance of being promoted if that's what they want. So anyways, these are all parts of a young man growing up and recognizing the world for what it is. If you find yourself around people that are reasonable, that are fair, that they're not your friend necessarily, but they're not out to screw you over, consider yourself lucky. Because a lot of places, management's very exploitative, and they will screw you over unless you're part of a protected group or inside friends with the management, et cetera, et cetera. And becoming more aware of these things is very useful because, again, guys come out of college and from hanging around with their friends and playing sports, and they're used to that relatively honest world. And then they walk into the corporate world where it's totally dishonest, lots of games and lying, constant lying. And I actually think the quote by Robert Conquest is pretty good. He's the historian, and he said, the best way to understand most bureaucratic organizations, and I would say most monopoly organizations, is that they're run by a cabal of their own really enemies, if you will, of that corporation, what it pretends to be all about. And they just do whatever they want. And this outwardly stated goals of the corporation, they're irrelevant. They're like a big joke, okay? That's what they say. That's what they expect the peasants and the proles to go by. But they themselves, they laugh at that type of stuff. So, if you're in a situation like that, you really probably don't have any ability to speak in your own defense unless a lot of other people were treated unfairly like you, or you have some type of bargaining angle. So make sure you know what your options are. Anyways, all of this stuff, it kind of comes back down to, like I said, most of the time it's best to keep your mouth shut. When you're around your close friend, you can talk freely. But when you're in a corporate setting, a work environment, and a lot of times a modern school academic environment, more often than not, the best thing to do is keep your mouth shut. And when you're in public environments, use your judgment, or talk mainly only about the thing that's safe to talk about. You need to tell the truth sometime, somewhere, but you have to use judgment about it because you want the long-term outcome to be beneficial for you and for other people. And that requires timing and judgment, and that comes with experience.